I'll expand the first part with an engaging, human-centric narrative that maintains a natural tone. The autumn wind whispered through the narrow streets of Seoul, carrying with it a chill that seemed to penetrate June Park's tired bones. Another long day at the software company had drained his energy, leaving him with nothing more than a desire to collapse onto his worn-out sofa and forget about the world. June was the kind of guy people would call predictably average. At 32, he had settled into a comfortable routine that felt more like a well-worn path than an adventure. Every morning, he'd wake up to the same alarm, grab the same convenience, store coffee, and navigate through the bustling Seoul subway with the precision of a machine. His colleagues at the tech company respected him for his consistency, but nobody would describe him as remarkable. That evening was different. Something felt slightly off the moment he approached his apartment building. The usual street vendors had packed up early, and an unusual silence hung in the air. His small studio apartment in the Gangnam district was nothing special, just another box in a sea of identical concrete structures that defined modern urban living in Seoul. As he fumbled with his keys, June noticed a strange vibration. It was subtle at first, just a tiny tremor that might have been his imagination. His fingers, typically steady from years of coding, seemed to tingle with an unexplained energy. The door handle felt different, almost alive, though he'd touched it 1,000 times before without incident. He remembered thinking it was probably just fatigue playing tricks on his mind. Late nights debugging complex software systems had a way of doing that to a person. But when he pushed the door open, the world around him shifted in a way he could never have anticipated. What greeted him wasn't his familiar, slightly messy apartment, with its stack of takeout containers and scattered programming books. Instead, a corridor stretched before him, metallic, impossibly clean, with surfaces that seemed to breathe and pulse with an inner light. The walls weren't white or grey, but a shimmering surface that defied simple description. June blinked multiple times, certain he was dreaming. He'd heard stories about programmers working themselves to exhaustion, creating hallucinations more real than reality. But this felt different. The air itself seemed charged with an energy that made the hair on his arms stand on end. His practical mind, the same mind that could debug complex algorithms in minutes, started racing. Was this a prank? A virtual reality experiment gone wrong? He took one tentative step forward, his reliable work shoes making no sound on the strange metallic surface. The corridor seemed to extend far beyond the physical limitations of his apartment building. Dimensions twisted and bent in ways that challenged everything he understood about space and reality. Each step felt like a journey into the unknown, yet something pulled him forward, a curiosity that had always lived beneath his structured, predictable exterior. He didn't know it then, but this moment would become the turning point of his entire existence. The ordinary software engineer from Seoul was about to step into an extraordinary adventure that would challenge everything he believed about the universe, about himself, and about the thin line between what we know and what remains hidden. Little did June realize that opening that door was about to change his life forever. The universe, it seemed, had been waiting for this precise moment when an average man would become something extraordinary. Would you like me to continue with the same engaging style for the subsequent parts? The silence was deafening. June's heart raced as he surveyed the impossible corridor, his mind struggling to make sense of what his eyes were seeing. The metallic walls seemed to breathe, pulsing with a soft, almost imperceptible rhythm that felt more like a heartbeat than a mechanical structure. At first he thought he was imagining her, a shimmer at the far end of the corridor like a mirage in the desert, but as he blinked and focused, the figure became more distinct. Hana stood perfectly still, her form both fragile and impossibly strong. Her skin wasn't just silver, it was a living, breathing surface that reflected light in ways that defied natural physics. June had seen his share of sci-fi movies, had written countless lines of code that simulated complex virtual realities, but nothing could have prepared him for this moment. His practical engineer's brain fought against the impossible vision before him. This wasn't a hologram. This wasn't a dream. This was something entirely different. She was tall, maybe a head taller than him, but her presence seemed to fill the entire corridor. Her eyes were the most striking feature. Not alien in the way movies portrayed extraterrestrial beings, but deep, intelligent, carrying a sadness that spoke of experiences far beyond human comprehension. "Who are you?" June found himself whispering, surprised by the tremor in his voice. He was a man who spoke confidently in boardroom meetings, who could negotiate complex software contracts without breaking a sweat. But now, he felt like a child confronting something completely beyond his understanding. Hannah didn't speak. Not in words, at least. Instead, a wave of something passed between them. Emotions, fragments of images, a sense of displacement that hit June like a physical force. He understood, without understanding how, that she was lost, stranded, alone. His programmer's mind kicked in. Communication, problem-solving. These were skills he understood. The strange corridor seemed to respond to his thoughts, the metallic walls shifting subtly, creating what seemed like connection points, communication interfaces that felt both technological and organic. June took a step forward, then another. With each step, the corridor seemed to acknowledge his movement. Soft lights pulsed beneath his feet, creating patterns that felt like a language waiting to be decoded. Hannah remained motionless, but her eyes never left him. He thought about his life up to this moment, endless lines of code, predictable days in a small Seoul apartment, dinners with colleagues who talked more about project deadlines than dreams, and now this, a moment that would shatter everything he knew about reality. The distance between them seemed to contract and expand. Sometimes she felt close enough to touch, other times impossibly far away. June realized he wasn't afraid. Confused, yes. Overwhelmed, absolutely. But not afraid. Something about Hannah suggested she needed help. Not the kind of help you offer a stranger on the street, but a deeper, more fundamental rescue. Her presence spoke of journeys across unimaginable distances, of technologies and experiences that human minds could barely comprehend. As he moved closer, fragments of understanding began to drift into his consciousness. Displacement, a mission gone wrong, a team separated, survival hanging by the thinnest of threads. These weren't thoughts or words, but impressions, like catching glimpses of a story through a foggy window. June Park, the ordinary software engineer, from Seoul, stood at the threshold of something extraordinary. The corridor around him hummed with potential. Hannah waited, her silver skin reflecting impossible light, her eyes holding secrets of universes he had never imagined. One more step, then another. The boundary between the familiar and the unknown blurred with each movement. Something was about to change, completely and forever. Would you like me to continue with the same narrative style for the next part? The connection between June and Hannah wasn't like anything he could have imagined. It wasn't verbal, wasn't physical. It was something that existed between thought and feeling, a language more complex than words could ever capture. Her first communication came as a series of fragmented images, snapshots of worlds that looked nothing like Earth, landscapes with crystal mountains, skies of deep purple and green, floating cities that defied gravity. June saw these not with his eyes, but somehow directly in his mind. Each image carried emotion, context, a depth of experience that made him feel like he was living multiple lifetimes in a single moment. The musical sounds were different. They weren't sounds in the traditional sense, more like vibrations that carried meaning. Sometimes they felt like gentle waves, other times like complex mathematical equations that could be heard rather than calculated. June, with his background in software engineering, found himself instinctively trying to decode these strange communications. He understood now that Hannah was more than just a visitor. She was a researcher, an explorer who had become separated from her team during what she described as a dimensional crossing. The term meant little to June initially, but as more fragments of her story emerged, he began to piece together a narrative that was both terrifying and incredible. Her mission had been simple, or as simple as interstellar exploration could be. A research expedition to understand the intricate connections between different dimensional realities. But something had gone wrong. A miscalculation, a technological failure, or perhaps something beyond human comprehension had torn her away. From her team, June realized he was her lifeline, not just a potential rescuer, but the only bridge between her current state of isolation and potential survival. His engineering background, his ability to analyze complex systems, suddenly felt like more than just a professional skill. It was becoming a crucial survival tool. The corridor around them seemed to respond to their growing connection. Walls shifted subtly, creating what looked like technological interfaces. June recognized patterns, not exactly like computer circuits, but similar enough to make his technical mind race with possibilities. "How can I help you?" he thought, realizing she would understand his intention more than his actual words. In response, Hannah projected a series of complex images. Technical schematics that looked like a hybrid between advanced circuitry and organic biological systems. June recognized some principles: data transmission, energy conversion, dimensional stabilization, but the overall design was unlike anything he had ever seen. His mind began to work automatically. Years of debugging complex software systems had trained him to see patterns, to understand intricate connections. What seemed incomprehensible to most people made perfect sense to him. Each bizarre schematic started to reveal its underlying logic. The stakes were clear. This wasn't just about helping a stranded explorer, this was about understanding something fundamental about the nature of reality itself. June felt a mix of excitement and terror. His ordinary life, the predictable days of coding and meetings, seemed like a distant memory. Hannah's presence was both alien and strangely familiar. Her emotional state leaked through their connection, a mixture of determination, loneliness, and an incredible scientific curiosity. She wasn't just trying to survive. She was trying to learn, to understand, to connect. June thought about his colleagues back at the software company. What would they say if they could see him now? The guy who was always serious, always focused, on practical solutions, now standing in an impossible corridor with a being from another dimension. But this was real, more real than any project he had ever worked on, more important than any software system he had ever designed. Their connection deepened. With each passing moment, the boundary between June's understanding and Hannah's knowledge began to blur. He was no longer just an observer or a potential rescuer. He was becoming a participant in something extraordinary. The corridor pulsed around them. Potential hung in the air like electricity before a storm. Something was about to happen, something that would change everything. Would you like me to continue with the next part in the same narrative style? The next hours became a dance of survival and discovery. June's hands moved with a precision he didn't know he possessed, combining fragments of technology that seemed to come from both his understanding and Hannah's mysterious knowledge. Their makeshift communication device started as a collection of seemingly random components, spare circuit boards from June's emergency repair kit, something he always carried from his days of fixing company hardware, pieces of what appeared to be advanced alien technology that Hannah seemed to materialize from thin air. It was like watching two musicians from completely different traditions create a symphony. June realized quickly that this wasn't just about building a device. It was about understanding. Each component they connected told a story. His practical engineering approach met her complex dimensional understanding in ways that defied traditional scientific method. "We're more alike than different," Hannah communicated through a series of gentle vibrations that June was beginning to understand. Her concept of communication was fluid, part technological, part emotional, part something entirely beyond human comprehension. The corridor around them became their workshop. Walls shifted, creating surfaces that seemed to anticipate their needs. Metallic panels would flatten into workbenches. Soft lights would illuminate precisely the components they needed. It was as if the entire space was alive, was learning, was helping them survive. June thought about his life before this moment: endless meetings, debugging software, eating convenience store meals at his desk. And now here he was, potentially saving an interdimensional explorer. The irony wasn't lost on him. Their communication device took shape slowly. It wasn't just a machine. It was a bridge between two completely different forms of existence. Every connection June made, Hannah would subtly adjust, a wire here, a quantum relay there. Things that made no sense by human technological standards, but seemed perfectly logical in their shared understanding. "Your world is more connected than you realize," Hana communicated. The message came not in words, but in a cascade of images. June saw networks of human connections, social media, global communication systems, underground technological networks. But he also saw something more, the invisible threads that connected everything, something his human perception had always missed. Their collaboration went beyond technology. June learned about worlds where technology and biology were indistinguishable. Hana learned about human resilience, about the unexpected ways humans solved problems. They were teaching each other without speaking a single recognizable word. The device began to hum. Not an electronic hum, but something more organic, like a heartbeat, like a living thing was coming to life between their hands. June's engineering skills met Hana's dimensional understanding in a way that felt almost magical. "We might actually pull this off," June thought, a smile breaking through his usually serious demeanor. Hana's response was a wave of emotional warmth that felt like sunrise on an unknown planet. Around them, the corridor continued to pulse. Walls that were once cold and metallic now seemed to breathe with their own rhythm. Their survival wasn't just about creating a communication device. It was about understanding, about connection, about bridging impossible distances. June realized he was no longer the same person who had walked through his apartment door just hours ago. Something fundamental had changed. His perception of reality, of possibility, of what it meant to be alive. All of it was transforming. The device was almost complete. One final connection, one moment that would change everything. The universe held its breath. "Would you like me to continue with the final part in the same narrative style?" The silence before her rescue was different from any silence June had ever experienced. It wasn't empty, it was charged with anticipation, with possibility, with the kind of potential that changes lives forever. First they heard nothing, then a vibration. Not from the corridor, but from somewhere beyond human perception. Hana's body shifted subtly, her silver skin becoming more translucent, revealing intricate patterns that looked like living circuitry. "They're coming," she communicated. But it wasn't just words, it was a complete emotional download. Fear, excitement, hope, loss, all wrapped into a single moment of understanding. June felt strangely calm. The software engineer who once panicked about missed project deadlines now stood prepared to witness something extraordinary. His hands, which had helped create their impossible communication device, now hung relaxed at his sides. The rescue team didn't arrive like something from a movie. There was no dramatic light, no explosive entrance. They simply emerged, like a thought becoming reality. Shapes that were both solid and fluid, technological and organic, filled the corridor. Hana approached June. No words were needed. Her hand, if you could call it a hand, reached towards his forehead. The touch wasn't physical in any traditional sense. It was a connection deeper than skin, deeper than thought. In that single moment, June's entire perception of reality shifted. Memories flooded his consciousness. Not just Hana's memories, but collective experiences of journeys across dimensions he could never have imagined. Worlds where technology breathed, civilizations that existed between moments, entire universes compressed into a single heartbeat. He saw quantum realities where human understanding was just the tiniest fraction of existence, landscapes that shifted with thought, civilizations that communicated through emotional wavelengths, technologies so advanced they appeared like magic. The fragment of consciousness she left wasn't a burden. It was a gift, a permanent window into a universe far more complex and beautiful than anything he had known. His brain, trained in logical programming, now had pathways of understanding that went beyond traditional human perception. When Hana's rescue team fully materialized, they moved with a grace that defied physics. They weren't aggressive. They weren't threatening. They were simply present, collecting their lost explorer with a precision that felt almost tender. June watched, knowing he would never be the same. The corridor began to dissolve. Not dramatically, but gently, like a dream losing its edges as morning approaches. Hannah looked at him one last time. Her eyes carried thousands of unspoken stories, of journeys across impossible distances. "Remember," her final communication suggested, "the universe is always more incredible than you imagine." And then she was gone. The metallic corridor melted back into his small soul apartment. Everything looked exactly the same. Yet nothing was. His coffee mug sat where he'd left it. His laptop remained open. But June knew the world had fundamentally changed. In the weeks that followed, subtle changes emerged. He started seeing patterns in everyday things, in street layouts, in computer networks, in human interactions, connections that were always there but never noticed. His coding became more intuitive, more connected to some larger understanding. His colleagues noticed something different, a spark in his eyes, a way of solving problems that seemed almost inspired. But they could never quite put their finger on what had changed. June kept the encounter to himself. Some stories, he realized, weren't meant to be told. They were meant to be lived. The universe, he now understood, was listening, always listening. "Would you like me to make any adjustments?" to the narrative.